Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays, and today I'm going to take a look at Foundry, which is probably best described as playing Factorio but in a Minecraft world. So as you can see, the entire world is made of, I'd say cubes but with slightly rounded corners, much like in Minecraft. However, I've also built up large numbers of machines in sort of bus systems and in assembly machines and all that sort of thing, very much like Factorio. So it's an excellent combination of the two games, and I'm going to talk about my impressions of it a little bit here in this video and talk about how it differs and how it's interesting and what works well and what doesn't. Now, as you can tell from the writing up there in the top left corner, the game is still in early access, so there's quite a lot of stuff that hasn't been finished off yet. But even in its current state, it is still a lot of fun, and I've been having a great time with it. I'm now about 13 streams in, and there's been a lot to get on with. So let's take a look at what the game offers and how it works. As you can clearly see, the game runs from a first-person point of view, and so that means, at least especially in the early game when you haven't got the jetpack yet, there's a lot of sort of running around amongst the buildings and trying to climb on them. And you can climb on the belts to a certain extent like this, but it is a little bit fiddly and a bit awkward. It suffers from the same sort of problems that Satisfactory did, where sometimes it's difficult to get to where you want to get to and to see what you want to see, because the machines they dwarf you. That said, in the early game you only have these things, which are the basic assembly machines and the mining drills that are even smaller, and so a lot of the time it's not too much of a problem. Yes, you can't easily climb over the buildings, you can't see through them, you can't get a good bird's eye view of them, but you can always build yourself a nerd pole like this and have a little bit of a view down from above, which helps a bit. And also, because the machines are relatively small, and your assembly lines are also relatively small, it's not too difficult to find your way around them. That said, the only way to configure buildings is by using the screen on the front of them, and even later on in the game I found it a little bit awkward trying to get to the screen on the machine, especially in a few of my cases where I've built them a bit too close together. It can be a little bit difficult to get in there and then fiddle with the control panel on the machine. The other problem is, even after you develop the jetpack, you get to the stage where your factory is quite large, and then it's difficult to spot where different things are being made. So for example, over here, this is my mall area. This produces all of the machines I need to go out and build my factory, whether that's assembly machines, belts, inserters, chemical plants, all of the spaceports, all of those sort of things come out of the machines down here. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. And I've got a fairly good idea, mostly based on how long ago I feel like I got a piece of technology. I've got a fairly good idea of where most of the things come from. But also, there's quite a lot where I have to go, okay, I want to find the oil refineries. Where are those? I don't know. So I've gone along here and I've put these signs on the front of the machines, which does help a lot, because then as I'm running along here, I can say, okay, that's flare stacks, distillation columns, pump jacks, and so on, all the way along here. I can tell what they are at a bit of a glance. However, when you're sort of a bit further away like this, you can't really tell what's what. It'd be nice if there was something equivalent to Factorio's alt mode, where an icon would appear on top of the building that shows you what it builds. And that could just be a large screen. If there was a large screen on the top of here, instead of perhaps instead of these inductors here, or this air conditioning unit, or whatever any of these sort of greebles on the top are, if perhaps part of that was just a larger version of this screen that simply showed a picture of the thing it is making, that would be quite good. It'd be a good start. Now, the problem with that would be that quite a lot of the buildings do look the same. If I have a look in the construction menu, okay, the belts are all very nice and distinctive, that's fine. The spaceports are okay. But then as we get down here, I'm not sure I can really tell the difference at a glance between a chemical processor and a casting machine. However, it would help quite a lot. There'd be a lot fewer things to go in and investigate. Again, the electric arc furnace looks fairly similar. The incinerator looks fairly similar. There are a lot of machines that are basically just a grey box. Now, when I'm looking at them on this menu and studying them fairly closely, there's a sense of scale in here as well. So, for example, the electric arc furnace is enormous, and you can see because all the buildings have these sort of blocks on the bottom. So take the drone miner as the simplest one, that's a 2x2 building, and you can clearly see the blocks there. Then you move on to the assembler, that's a 3x3, again you can see the blocks around the bottom of it. And then you get on to the bigger ones like distillation column, which is apparently a 5x5, and you can the blocks look a lot smaller, they're harder to count. And eventually you get all the way onto something like the electric arc furnace, which is 18x9, and yeah, I'll take your word for it that there's 18 blocks along the side of there. But even if I can't actually count them, I can see from here that there is a lot of them, and they're very, very small. So I can tell that's a very, very large building. So it does help to an extent. You get a bit of an idea from the icons, but I suspect if these were just put on top of a building, you'd struggle to tell what was what. Still, that said, it would be a good step in the right direction. The best thing about the 3D first-person point of view is that when you do get onto those larger buildings that I've been talking about, they do start to feel quite impressive. Now, it doesn't have quite the same sense of scale that Satisfactory did, which I think is partly down to the slightly more cartoony, soft graphics, whereas Satisfactory was going for a slightly more realistic look. And also I think partly because these machines aren't quite as big and tend not to have quite the same level of detail and things like ladders and platforms on them. That said, some of the really large buildings, there's the lava smelters underground that I've got deep underground, do actually have platforms and things on them, so you do get that feeling of scale from those. You've also got a sense of scale from some of the more advanced buildings, like this one over here, which is the it's part of something to do with the construction drone systems, where you've got these massive aircraft that are sitting here, and then you've got a huge warehouse next to them. So there is definitely a sense of scale. And I'm starting to get off into the really, really big buildings. Like over here, we've got this radio tower which allows me to communicate with my space station from wherever I want. And also this building over here, which scans the map for me. And again, is an absolutely enormous construction. And you feel the sense of scale in this game a lot more than you do in Factorio, which I think is quite nice. But my favourite thing that comes with the whole 3D Minecraft style world is that some of your resource patches can be underground, like this patch of mineral rock, which, as you can see from the way it's sort of moving around there, is quite a long way underground. And if we get out my mining laser, and then I decide I want to dig, and then maybe I want to dig a hole down to have a look at it like this, we can drop down here and we can find that yes, this patch of mineral rock underground has been, I have discovered this, I've put in some mining drills around it, and these, my drone miners, are working very, very hard at chipping away at the rock and then allowing me to take it away, well in this case to go off and be made into concrete, which isn't really happening at the moment, and over here this one goes away to be made into glass. And there is something very satisfying about having to dig down and make an actual genuinely underground mine. The first few patches, your sort of starter patches, are on the surface, so you don't have to worry about any of this sort of shenaniganery. But later on, the bigger ones are all way underground, and yes, you have to then dig down to find them. And I really like that. It's very satisfying, and there's something very pleasing about an actual underground mine, especially after Factorio and Satisfactory both just have them simply as patches you can access from the surface. Another one of my major constructions is this copper mine over here. This is sort of my secondary, I think, copper mine. And this is actually being dug out of the side of a hill. So I came over here. Some of this valley was sort of fairly natural, although I've expanded it quite a lot with explosives and orbital lasers. But there's this ore patch of copper that's tucked away neatly underground here, which I've sort of opened out to access, and then put loads of drills around it. And then through the magic of copy and paste, which comes in this game in the form of a mod, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, I've put in this enormous area over here that crushes and smelts it, allowing me to then produce huge quantities of these copper rods that can then be shipped off over to my main factory. Down the other end of this very, very long tunnel, which goes through the middle of this mountain, drops down some elevators, and then goes through an underground tunnel underneath my main mall area before popping up over here and emerging on various spirally belts that bring it up out of the ground. So again, this is another lovely feature of the whole 3D-ness of it, where I can hide these belts that are carrying all my resources from the mountain over there underground and then have them pop up in the area where I'm actually using them. Now, running them underground is of course not compulsory. There's no reason why these belts couldn't be way up in the air carrying resources, and in fact a lot of my intermediate resources are being carried on belts that are travelling quite high up through the air along here, and then eventually turning into an enormous tangle of spaghetti, but that's how these things tend to go. But yeah, these are being brought over on nice elevated belts, but over there with the basic resources, I decided to bring them along underground. Would look neater and be a bit more interesting and slightly different. For your mines that are way, way underground, you can also put in elevators. So here I can call a lift, it'll come up like this, and then I can jump into it and it'll take me down to the appropriate level. And then we've also got freight elevators like this one, which you can pass resources into, and then they'll take them down to whatever level they're required and bring them out at the other end of the elevator. And for example, on this one, I've got 3 levels I can go to. I can come right up to the surface, I can go down to my iron smelting level. If I click on that one, it'll take me down. That's a height of 115, as opposed to my current height of 132. So that's only a relatively short way underground. I can pop out here and have a quick look, and then down here, similarly to the copper smelting I just showed you, I've got an area here where we've got iron ore rubble coming in, being crushed into iron ore, and then smelted down the other end into actual iron plates that we can send off to the rest of the factory. Alternatively, I can go all the way down to the lava level at a height of 10. So this is a very long way down, and so let's speed up the video a little bit. And now you join me down on the lava level. And if we have a look outside here, you can see in this particular area, I'm bringing in thermalite ingots, and then all of my lava smelters are then squashing them down into the thermalite plates, which can be sent back up as another resource to be used. And this is one of the buildings I was talking about that actually has catwalks inside it because it's so big. and then the control panel for it is actually on the inside of the machine, which is slightly bizarre and interesting. But then down here, as you can see, I've been putting these buildings down into the lava patches, and they're another type of machine which runs off the lava and allows you to work with more difficult metals. And you can also see the bottom end of the cargo lifts here, where we're bringing all the freight elevators, where we're bringing in the thermalite and sending away the thermalite plates in order to use them in the rest of the factory. Right, let's head back up to the surface again. That was a very brief stop down here. I have to admit that I feel like I've not really taken full advantage of the 3D-ness of this game, because all of my buildings, all of my assembly lines are essentially flat, so that we've got rows and rows of machines here. I don't have another layer of machines above them. The only real place where I've used the third dimension is for moving belts around. So there's a lot of belts where belts will, for example, go over other belts like that, as you can see. And in some cases I've got belts that will go over the top of machines because I needed the assembly machine 1s to be taken from here to over here in order to make them into assembly machine 2s, for example, due to bad planning. Later on I did my planning a little bit better, and I've gone from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 of various things over here. I think this one is belts and so on. There are areas where I've used the 3D a little bit better, but most of the time it's been largely for belts. Although, as you saw over in my mining area with the copper processing, there I did put in a second floor of copper smelting above, and I think that's sort of how it works out. It tends to be when I want to have large amounts of the same thing happening. At that point, it feels more worthwhile having multiple layers. Whereas when they're all different, it's easier to just lay them out in a long line because it makes getting at them a bit easier and working out what's going on. But then over here, this is the area where I've got into making all of the robots that you make later on in the game. And there's a lot of resources coming in here, which is why I built this sort of vertical bus system. And then I realised that turns into a weird and horrible tangle of spaghetti when you want to try and get all the resources in and out. So this bit along here is an absolute nightmare. And then I realised that actually this is just poor design. And so later on, I've now gone for a much more normal Factorio style flat bus going along here, where I've got a row of belts carrying my resources along. And then, well, instead of underground belts, I've got overground belts here. So the belts, when they split off, are going up and then across. But other than that, this is very, very similar to the way I make buses in Factorio. One thing that is notable here is that my actual assembly machines are a block higher than the bus, and that means when these go up, they don't then need to go down again in order to get to the machines. So the bus is slightly depressed, slightly below the actual area where I'm building, and that works quite nicely. Having this sort of spaghetti tangles that turn up whenever you try and sort of cobble things in a bit later is a little bit frustrating, but I'd say it's frustrating in the good way, because you're aware that it's entirely your fault for not planning your build well enough and just sticking belts wherever they'll go. So there are a few areas like over here where all these resources, all the copper is coming up out of the ground, where getting extra belts to go through here has been tricky, and getting extra copper to be flowing through has been tricky, and I've had to really abuse the third dimension in order to get this working. So you can see here, for example, there's this belt coming up with the copper on it and then feeding through this splitter, but then that wasn't enough, so I've got another belt coming up from down here feeding more copper in along here, and then this one just goes over the top until we need it for somewhere way down there. And these are the sort of tricks you can pull quite easily with the third dimension. One problem with it though, however, is there's no easy way to get a quick overview of absolutely everything. So there is a map, and the map is pretty good, but as you can see, where you have a lot of different things in the same area at different heights, it turns into a bit of a tangle. And this is partly because I've built too many things in the same place. I've built far too compact because I didn't know what I was doing. This is my first time with the game. But also I think it's fairly inevitable if you have multiple belts running sort of across each other. Now, the obvious answer to this would be to spread the builds out a bit more, and belts are quite cheap, so that seems like a reasonable thing to do. However, as I said, coming to this as a newbie, I didn't know how big things were going to have to be, so I didn't really build it on the scale it was going to need to work at. If I approached the game again, then yeah, sure, I'd spread things out a bit more, but you don't know just how much space things are going to take up until you start building. I did try to be a little bit sensible about it, so from my starting position in the middle here, I put my mall, so the area where all the buildings are made, that's this bit along here, and then this orange stripe is where the copper's coming in underground, but we'll ignore that because that's not quite relevant. So yeah, I've got my mall area in here, which has gone quite well, although it started to butt up against a mountain over here, but I can blow that up, so that's not too much of a problem. Then I did science production up here. then I did oil production or oil processing in this area, sort of in the middle here, and then I've started to go downwards with making the robots for sale and all of the space launch systems along here as well. And there have been a few extra things I've tried to squeeze in here and there, but mostly that system has worked quite well. The only problem is when you run into the massive mountains, and then you sort of struggle to have enough space to build, and so I've been having to blow them up quite a lot. You also run into slight problems when you start to run out of resources. So my starter patches, I had an iron patch in about here and a copper patch I think just up here. I started off, I put in my mining drills on them, and then I put in my smelting right next to them, as you do, and that worked quite well. But then they ran out, so I've moved off now to there's an iron patch here and an iron patch down here, both of which are way underground. But because they're underground, it sort of doesn't matter that they're right in the middle of the factory, because then all the smelting can be done underground. And yes, okay, there's a bit of spaghetti trying to work out how to get the resources out and bring them along at ground level, but there's an enormous amount of space available underground in the third dimension, so it hasn't been too much of a problem. And then again, the copper is way over here, so that's not been too much of a difficulty. The game does have a tagging system, so these little squares with cutouts in them, you can see these are places I put in tags, so coal mine, copper mine, oil mine. What else have I actually got on here? I'm sure there's a few others. Landing location. Yeah, I've labelled the important things, but that's about as far as I've got so far. And so I think if you were playing multiplayer, that'd be extremely useful. But because it's single player, I can mostly keep roughly where things are in my head. Occasionally, if I go to the robot area, I'd have to search for a particular robot type. If I go to the mall, I'll have to search for a particular type of machine. But most of the time, I've got a rough idea of where all the different things are, so it's not too bad. But as I was saying at the beginning when I started talking about this, representing a 3D world in 2D is quite difficult, so I can definitely see why they've struggled. I've talked a little bit about the resources in the sort of the going around and waving and looking at them, and it has what I would call probably the standard set of factory game resources. There is iron, although they call it xenoferrite. There is copper, although they call it technum. There is oil, although they call it olumite. There is stone, which is called mineral rock, so that at least is about right. And then there's coal, which they call ignium. And then finally there's the mysterious teluxite, which I don't really know all that much about yet, but that seems to be the weird alien one that's coming into this game, and we'll find out more about that as I progress further. So I've been grumbling a little bit on the stream about them having silly names rather than just being called iron, copper and coal and oil. But I've had a few people giving sort of vague justifications for it. So there's a suggestion that perhaps, on Earth, iron ore is not really a thing. There are many, many different types of ores that contain iron. So perhaps xenoferrite is just an alien ore that doesn't exist on Earth, but that does contain iron. So they call it xenoferrite because alien iron. Fine, that makes a certain sort of sense. But then, when you smelt that down into plates, those are clearly just iron plates, and so they should probably be called that, and therefore it would be nice to call it iron ore for the sake of confusion. Similarly, maybe you can make the same sort of argument with the copper. It's technum because it's the metal that's used for technological stuff. But come on, it's copper. Let's just call it copper. And in ignium for the coal, it's called ignium because it's a thing that burns. Yes, okay, the names make sense, kind of, but it'd be a lot simpler if they just stuck with the real world names for it. You can then go on and do further things with it. So as I said, you can make the xenoferrite plates and technum rods, so iron and copper in other words, but you can also make steel, which is actually just called steel, so good. And then with the teluxite, it goes into ingots and liquid teluxite. We'll find out more about that as we go. And then thermalite seems to be some sort of magic space plastic. It's another thing that doesn't have a direct real-world analogue as far as I'm aware, so I think I'm happy to call that one thermalite. There's also the oil processing, where you go from crude oil to what I would guess is some sort of LPG or petroleum gas or something like that, and then you can make a liquid polymer, which is a plastic, which you can then turn into actual plastic plates down here, plastic boards. Great. You've got a gas, you've got a liquid fuel, you've got an acid, you've got paint apparently, and you've got oh yes, and we'll get back to the ignium-enriched water later. But basically, you've got a simple sort of standard oil processing going on there as well, which is quite nice. And then with these resources, you can then process them into other intermediates. So we can make machinery parts, which are, I guess, they're the equivalent of Factorio's iron gears. Now, I'm sorry if I'm going to be comparing this game a lot to Factorio, but having played 3,500 hours of it, it does feel like my default. And then you've got advanced components, which are where you add in some steel as well, so you get some advanced machinery parts. Great, that makes sense. It's a more advanced version of it. And there's some electronic ones as well. So you can make wire out of copper, you can make electronic components out of a bit more copper. So you've got an iron-based intermediate and a copper-based intermediate, which go into a lot of the machines you make. And that's quite nice. It gives you, as I say, it gives you some intermediates, so you've got various different things to balance. And then as you go further on, you get into things like circuit boards and CPUs and energy cells and all kinds of advanced things that go into the more advanced machines to give you extra steps, extra challenges, and make things a bit more difficult. So it's your nice, happy, extending tech tree. Yeah, it works very nicely. I'm very happy with it. Much as you'd expect, the ore patches tend to get generally bigger as you move away from your start. So our starter patches that were on the surface up here were really quite small, and then we've got a bigger one down here and a massive one here. And then at some point later on, you get the vein mining technology, which means instead of having your normal drone miners, which you use for the basic ore patches like this, where you have a little box and drones fly out of it, zap the rocks, collect a bit of it, and then fly back and go back into their box, and where it can be dumped onto a belt. Instead of running like that, you get access to the vein miner instead, which is a massive machine with a huge drill on the front of it that hammers away at these massive ore patches that are on the edges of a huge vein. So if I use the scanometron again, you can see there is this enormous, in fact I'm basically inside it so you can't really see it. You can see there's an enormous vein of telexite there, which has certain little patches where I'm able to dig into it with my mining drill. So there's one down there, a couple down there, one here that I'm drilling into. And you gradually dig those out and you get a lot more resource out from those, and eventually you develop fracking, which allows you to feed in a special type of liquid into it, which means you can then keep these veins running forever so they never run out. And one of the frustrating things about playing factory games like Factorio and Foundry to an extent is having to go around and rebuild new mines every so often when the patches run out. At the beginning that's sort of interesting because it's new and fun and so on, but later on you want to get on with the more important parts of the game. And so this does really, really well, where you start off with the patches that run out, and then later on you go out and you can make your patches infinite, which means you don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think that's going to be really, really good. I'm looking forward to getting to that stage. But as it is, the patches have tended to last for a decent amount of time. I haven't felt that I'm having to move them too often. Interestingly, the vein miner gradually extends as it digs further and further in. So this gap in the middle here with these carts running up and down it wasn't there when I first placed this mine. It's a new thing that's come with the mine having dug out quite a bit of this tunnel, and it's just gradually extending itself and moving outwards. I haven't seen it move, but I have seen that it is now significantly longer than it was when I first placed it. Most resources go through a multi-stage processing. So, for example, in the case of telexite, which is admittedly an advanced ore, but we'll have a look at it because I'm over here. It first goes into a crusher that turns the telexite ore rubble into telexite ore. Then it goes into these smelting machines, which turn it from an ore into an ingot. Now, these ingots are a slightly funny shape compared to some of the other ones, but never mind. And then in the particular case of telexite, we then put it into this arc smelter, which then fluidizes it, which melts it and turns it into a liquid, which we can pass over to this casting machine to make into these wafers. These telexites therefore appears to be some sort of silicon-y quartzy substance, because those are going off to be made into processors. So I guess that's what it is. In the case of iron and copper, they're a little bit easier. You can turn the xenoferrite or rubble, the stuff you dig directly out of the ground, straight into plates, and that's really, really easy. You dig it up, you put it into a smelter, and boom, you get iron plates. Alternatively, you can make the plates out of xenoferrite ore, which you do by putting the xenoferrite ore rubble into a crusher. So you crush the rubble into ore, and then you smelt the ore into plates, and that's good because you get slightly more out. So instead of being a 1-to-1 recipe here, you instead, this one is a 2-to-3 recipe, so you essentially get an extra productivity bonus of 50%, which is fantastic because digging up all of these resources is hard work. Interestingly, steel takes a blend of the of xenoferrite ore and igneum ore, or iron ore and coal. You have the option of making the dodgy ore blend out of the rubbles, or you can make the advanced one out of the ores, and then either of those can then be made into steel. And again, you get the productivity bonus if you make it into the better ores first. So all of this makes sense. It gives you an incentive to do the extra steps, but early on in the game, right at the beginning, you don't have to worry about it being quite so complicated. Which, fairly standard, but also very, very nice. The next thing I want to talk about is logistics and transporting stuff around, and, well, I'm in quite a good place to talk about this because this is my telexite mine, which is a long way from the rest of my factory. So all the rest of the factory is way off over there. And so, in this particular case, I've made an incredibly long belt to carry it across. So it goes down and then it goes underground here. I used a tunnel boring machine to make a nice convenient hole through here. And this is something that was added in the most recent update. So that's made me a nice 5x5 hole, which I can run a belt down, I can easily fly down it. It's great, it's really, really useful, but it is still quite a long way from where I dug up the telexite to where I want to use it. So again, we'll speed this up a little bit so you don't have to wait too long. Eventually the telexite pops out over here with a little zigzag belt and is ready to then be put into some machines to do something useful with it. And this is my petrochem area where I'm doing all kinds of things with the oil because, well, I need oil for those circuit boards, so that's what we're doing. Another way to transport stuff around over long distances is to use the aircraft. And you can see one over here sat on a landing pad. This is transporting coal for me because my coal mine is now all the way over here, and my old coal mine, and therefore where all the coal belts are leading from, was over here, where the landing pad is. And so this unloads gradually into the landing pad, which is then passed out into this storage bin here, which then passes it out along the belts, and I can then use this in the rest of the factory as I want to. When the aircraft runs out of cargo, it'll fly back over to the coal mine, which is 400 metres off over that way. I won't go and show you because it's a long way. And then it'll fill up again. It'll come back over here, and oh look, there's the pilot inside, the little robot guy who flies my ship for me. Hello, yes, I can see you. So that's quite good as a sort of a point-to-point transport. The throughput of these isn't amazing. I suspect if I was using this for iron or copper, I would need to have quite a lot of these. And as far as I can tell, when I program it, I'm not quite sure what sort of level of flexibility I get. I do get set names for the landing pad at both ends. And was it in the ship that I programmed it? It's been so long, I can't remember. Well, no, I don't remember. I think maybe at the other end I tell the ship where to go, which makes me think it's probably going to be a one-to-one type system. So you have one takeoff pad going to one landing pad, and if you want to have more aircraft, more throughput, or more mines, you need to have if I wanted to have more coal coming in, I'd set up another coal patch somewhere else, and then an additional landing pad next to this one, and then have it feed out from both of those into the rest of the factory. I don't think I'd be able to have multiple planes coming in from the coal patches and coming to here, or having the coal patch feeding to multiple landing pads. I haven't tried this though, so it's quite possible I'm wrong about that. I expect this is going to be intended for low quantities and long distances though, because there is going to be trains coming in a future upgrade. They've shown some teaser videos about the trains, so I know they're going to be happening, they're going to be coming, and trains are going to be fantastic. And then that's going to be brilliant for bringing large quantities of things like coal and iron and copper in from wherever they are, and just making sure it all gets brought to where it's needed. I really, really hope they make the trains work like the Factorio ones, where you can have stations turn themselves on and off based on how much resource they're holding, allowing drop-off stations to call for a train when they're running low and pick-up stations to call for a train when they're full, rather than the satisfactory system where you just put in station names and then kind of hope for the best, and it all goes a bit, and it wasn't very satisfactory, to be quite honest. It was also a pain to build, but Foundry seems to be much better about clipping things together. I've not had any problems with belts not attaching. There are a number of different speeds of belts in the game. So far I've unlocked red ones, which are the slowest, I've unlocked yellow ones, which are the mediumest, and then I've unlocked green ones, which are the fastest. If we have a look at those, the interesting thing about these is they go from, well, they give the items per minute rather than per second, but sure, why not? So it's 160 items per minute, 320 and 640 items per minute. I kind of wish they were multiples of 60 so that I could do the maths a bit more easily in my head, but never mind. But the interesting thing about these is you'll notice they double for each tier. So that's a tier 1, the tier 2 is twice as fast as the tier 1, the tier 3 is twice as fast as the tier 2. This is the same as Satisfactory, but different to Factorio, where in Factorio, the tier 3 is triple the speed of the tier 1, so it goes up arithmetically, whereas in Foundry and Satisfactory it goes up geometrically. And this means that if you want to put in an upgrade, you can drop in a faster speed of belt, and that gives you an enormous amount of extra throughput. So for example, if I upgraded this to green rather than yellow, it would literally double the speed. That'd be as good as putting in another belt. And that means that makes doing upgrades a lot easier, and you don't tend to end up with the massive sort of wide bus type systems that you often do in Factorio, because you can make a 4-belt bus just by going up 2 tiers of belt. That's a little bit like the stacking system in Space Age, I guess. Then now there are a few places where I have still needed to have many belts coming in, so the copper and the iron are needed in absolutely enormous quantities. But perhaps that's due to a sort of a lack of imagination on my part. Maybe my iron mine should be making the mechanical components, maybe my copper mine should be making the electronic components, and then we should be shipping those over on a green belt, because that would compact 2 pieces of copper into one piece of electronic component. The machinery plates are just 1-to-1, so that wouldn't really help very much. But the advanced ones would put 2 pieces of copper and 1 piece of steel into a single item, and therefore we'd be able to fit a lot more of them down the belt. So perhaps I should have a mine that outputs these parts, and a mine that outputs these parts, as well as the basic metals, of course, because the basic metals are needed later on as well. I don't know. That's something I'll have to think about, because it might help a bit. It might not. I did find laying the enormous numbers of copper belts and enormous numbers of iron belts that I needed a bit of a faff, but that's because I went underground for it, and then therefore I had to dig the holes. And with the new update, with better digging mechanisms, with the boring machine, and also there's something else which I'll show you in a moment because it's really cool. With those added in, the effort of digging has become much less, and therefore putting in another copper highway like this now would be a lot easier. the new system which I was alluding to of digging is absolutely fantastic. This allows you to come in and using this particular tool, you can then select a 3D area like this, with the pop-up it tells you how big an area you selected, and then I can then choose how high I want it to be, like that, and then that just marks this entire area for deconstruction. Now, at this point I have a choice. I can use my personal drones, where little robots will fly out of my own inventory, hopefully, and will fly over. Maybe I have to be a bit closer. No, I'm not sure why this isn't working. Oh yeah, there we go. Little robots will fly out of my inventory and will start mining out the dirt that I highlighted. And this allows me to quickly and easily dig holes in various places. But this should also call for my construction ship, which seems to be being a bit lazy at the moment. But then that will fly over and it will drop construction drones down from itself and quickly mine this whole area out while I'm away doing something completely different, which is very, very useful. It's a very, very hands-off way of saying I don't want this mountain to be here, and then your robot minions will fly over and deal with it. There is my construction ship. I don't know why it's being so lazy at the moment, but apparently it is. I guess we'll wait and see. So as I was saying, most transport in this game seems to be done by belts at the moment, at least for the solids. The fluids are transported around by pipes, and the pipes work well over long distances. It's a little bit of a faff placing them all down, admittedly, but eventually you get there. The only problem is that if you go too far, a bit like the new version of Factorio, if you go too far, you eventually need to have a pump like this one to apply pressure and keep the fluid flowing. And this mostly isn't too bad, except the pumps are low voltage machines, and on long runs you tend not to have low voltage electricity available. And I'll talk a bit more about that in the next video. I think I've been going for quite a long time now. It's been about almost 50 minutes of recording. Now it's going to get shorter when I edit it, but it's going to be quite a long video otherwise. So I think I'll be making a part 2 of this as well. But I hope this has been interesting and it's given you a bit of a flavour of what Foundry is like and how things work. If you're interested in watching me play it, I'm currently streaming it every Wednesday evening at 8 PM UK time, so please come along to watch that. There are videos coming out every Thursday and Friday on the channel. They're mostly Factorio, but there are a few other ones that are about Foundry and about cars and DIY and so on, interspersed as we go. And we're streaming Factorio Planetary Pioneers every Monday as well. So keep an eye out on everything on the channel. Please make sure you're subscribed. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.